Pinky, I think we've reached this point where we can do some sharing of reflections as we take a look at 2024 in terms of lessons learned or some of the lessons that we've learned in 2024. If I ask you that question, what would be some of the things that you'd want to include in this conversation?
To me, what I find we need to do is personalize the employee experience. Meet the employees where they are. Because I think we talked about, the five generations in the workplace. We have to we have to recognize that and make sure that, like I said, we personalize the experience for the employees. It cannot be just one way of dealing with them because there really are different ways, of inspiring them, motivating them. You know how it is. Hindi katulad nung dati, no? When we used to be handling HR. It cannot be that way anymore. So to me, that's very important. No? The well-being of the employees, I think, which captures what I'm saying. No? Not just financially, psychologically, especially. So yun, to me, that's
Yeah.
a reflection that I've had. No.
On my part, and I think we have already touched this a little earlier in our conversation, is really the distinguishing thing about management and leadership, I think, is something that is very critical to distinguish because we've been interchanging the two ever since for a long time. And they're really two different things, two different disciplines. The mindset and the skill sets are different when you're managing and leading. So I think, and I've done some deep reflections on this year, that there is really this difference. And I often want to say that probably to be effective today, people should know when to stop managing and start leading. Managing is critical, but to overmanage is also bad.
True.
And that's the reason why you need to know when to stop managing and start leading. But there's no such thing as over leading because leading is where you inspire, you encourage, you mobilize people. Managing is when you set the parameters, the KPIs, the control systems, and things like that. You need to do that,
Yeah.
but you should know when to stop doing that and start.
Yeah.
Because this is what you call this is the push, and the other one is the pull. This is when you inspire people.
Yeah. We talked about that earlier. Yeah, I did say that, leaders now have to wear three hats, but they have to be able to balance, all those roles that they have to play: manager, leader, and coach. I think it's really very important for leaders to recognize that they have a very important role in building a coaching culture because that's very key, in transforming organizations.
It's kind of dangerous when you intermix the two because I've seen in some organizations they call it a leadership program, but actually when you see the content, it's a management program.
Yun na nga eh. Yeah,
Because
that's true.
there's a lot of planning, controlling, and things like that. When they should be talking about how do you inspire, how do you encourage, how do you appreciate, and so on and so forth, which is more on the leadership side part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why, it's sad that many of the organizations still, don't have leaders who have that new mindset. But I'm very happy that in our community, the investors in people, it's really the leaders are driving all this transformation. No? That's great. No? And I think, more organizations should start doing that. That's one of the priorities that organizations should have, no? Leader development.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier about the challenge of leadership. Like leading remote employees, leading different generations, leading a lot of different, different people. That's why if you don't have a strong leadership muscle and just a management strong muscle, can you imagine managing remote employees and managing different personalities and things like that? I think that's where I think the problem really arises. That's why you need to really control when you should stop doing that and start doing the leading part.
Mhm.
The other thing that I've been engaged in a lot of thought thinking this year is the differentiation between coaching and mentoring.
Mm. Yeah.
Coaching is a very advanced discipline already these days. But when you take a look at these two, the reason why I'm very interested in the two, because I think these two things are very important for organizations, because they are both classified as development conversations. And I think when we take a look at many of our organizations, pushing for innovation and digitalization, there's a lot of learning attached to make that really work. And you need a lot of these development conversations. So while coaching is a good development conversation, it has its own distinct skill set. Mentoring is another type that needs to be developed, and
Yeah.
so that the manager or the leader will have more choices of what to
Totoo.
use to be
Yeah.
able to really help individuals grow,
True.
to
True.
be able to address the innovation challenge
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the digitalization challenge of
Yeah. Yeah.
organizations.
In the course of my own coaching practice, no, I've seen siguro the lack of understanding of what coaching is all about. So even if it's not advice, no, I've had to fall back on my consultant mentoring role, no. Especially siguro in the Philippines now, no. We're not coaching is it's something that's very new to us. People don't really understand what coaching is. So I agree with you, that it probably has to be a blend between coaching and mentoring. No? But what's important is that leaders should move from a directive approach to a non-directive approach, allow people to come up with their own solutions, come up with their own ideas on how to face their challenges. And if required, then maybe we can just help out, no? But support them as they find solutions or answers to whatever issues they face.
That's right. So I guess the development conversations becomes very crucial conversations that can complement a lot of the performance conversations
Yeah,
that managers and
yeah,
leaders do
yeah.
with their people, no?
Right.
Because if you try to take a look at it, one really reinforces the other. You cannot improve performance if you don't have an effort to develop the people that are under your care.
Right.
So that's where these dynamics really come into the.
Well, talking about leadership, management, and coaching, I think they're very closely related because coaching is such an important skill for a leader, I feel. And that's because coaching is empowering. And if you think about one of the differences between leaders and managers, I think a leader is empowering where not a leader, leadership is empowering where management is more about control, as Jerry, you mentioned. And I think we've actually moved on, even though, Pinky, you're saying it's relatively new, coaching is a practice in the Philippines, but I think we have moved on. I see it in our organizations where we no longer see coaching as the same as, say, one-to-one teaching or one-to-one training. And we no longer see it as something that you bring in as a tool to help you as a leader or a manager to manage poor performance. And it's much more a recognition that actually we all benefit from coaching, because coaching with, as you mentioned, asking those powerful questions is a way to help each one of us to think through our problems, solve our problems, and to find ways forward. So the two are excellent combinations. A leader with coaching skills, I think, is something that all organizations should be working towards, that all of their leaders have that kind of coaching skill.
Talking about proud moments about 2024, what are some of the moments or stories you can tell that made you really proud this year?
I'm very happy that I've had the opportunity to work with companies like we have in the Investors in People community. I've worked with large organizations, and sometimes you develop this feeling of, or this thought that, you're the best. We have state-of-the-art programs. But having been exposed to, the smaller companies, I've come to realize, and that makes me really proud, no, that there are many practices in these companies which are really helping their organizations. No? And that, to me, is very humbling also. No? So parang learning from them, learning from all their practices, seeing the good that they're doing for their employees, for the business, that to me, is something that I'm really proud of because I've had that opportunity to witness that myself when I do the assessments.
Yeah, great. In my case, I can think of two moments really. One is when SEC won the
Oh,
London
yeah.
Awards.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that really
right,
made all
right.
of us proud, isn't it?
True.
Because a Filipino organization, a
Oo
government
nga eh.
institution at that, winning the Overseas Employer of the Year
Oo.
in the recent London Awards of in IIP International. So that is one proud moment for me. The other second proud moment for me is our second IIP Philippines Awards celebration, which I think was an improvement over the first one.
Yeah.
We had more audience, more varied,
True.
applications. The award is because this is the contest of the best among the best.
Oo.
If we are making our community compete with each other in these awards, can you imagine, what the product of this is? These are all very proud moments for me because this is a sign of the fruits of the labor of many of these organizations as they journeyed with us to become better organizations.
For me, things that I've been proud of in 2024, I definitely, probably what first came to mind was the same as you, Jerry, that when Securities and Exchange Commission from the Philippines were announced as the winner of the Overseas Employer of the Year in London in November at the awards celebration. And I was fortunate enough to be there with the head of HR and one of the commissioners, and it was really a moment of pride to hear Securities and Exchange Commission announced as the winner. So that was excellent. I think, and definitely I agree with our awards. It's really a moment of pride and inspiration to have all these organizations together and sharing good practice. It's what we're all about, is how can we get out there and encourage good practices like the ones that we saw in the awards that I think we've talked about already. The other thing that I think has been a great sense of pride is whenever we've done an assessment, and this is not just this year, but I think I particularly noticed it this year, that whenever we do an assessment, almost always the organization has transformed itself in some way from when we've seen them previously, even though we've kept in touch, and we know what's happening. Actually, when you get into the depth of understanding what's happening in the organization, it's a wow when you see what has changed and how they've transformed, especially when you look back to when they maybe first started with investors and people, and you can see a big change. And even, I would say, organizations that have achieved, say, the highest level of investors and people accreditation, which is platinum, when you go there and you think, well, what can they have done better? And they have improved in so many different ways in almost all aspects of leadership and people management, of course, integrated into the business. And SIPSI, for example, is an example of that. Already platinum because of the great practices they've got, but even more platinum because you can see the improvement. And what else? Pinky was saying about the framework, and one thing I think we can be maybe using more use of in the Philippines in the coming years and years to come is the well-being framework, because we all organizations know that well-being has become an even more, can it be an even more important issue? But it really has come to the forefront as a result of the pandemic, especially mental health. because of all the issues that it created. But we now have a really excellent, updated framework which aligns extremely well. It kind of slots into the framework that we have for investors in people, but it's investing in well-being. And I think we can be using that to really get that same momentum of continuous improvement that organizations now have using the We Invest in People framework. We can get the same thing, and of course the two things can combine and run together with the We Invest in Wellbeing framework as well, which is all about, creating a culture of well-being in the organization, and which good, positive organization doesn't want to have that.
The other thing also, siguro, Jerry, is that we've sort of gone out of our comfort zone, which is assessment. We're now looking at training, coaching, which we've not really considered doing before. But now we're expanding our services. So that also, well, personally, that makes me proud, that we're part.
Yeah.
I'm part of this team, that does not just assessment but all these other things. So yeah.
Yeah, talking about challenges that we faced as an organization, Investors in People Philippines, what do you think is the challenge that we faced this year?
I've been thinking about that a great deal, but I think one of the things that we face is getting more organizations to understand the value of having a framework. And I think Investors in People is a very powerful framework. And I've said this many times over. Even as I was beginning to learn about Investors in People and all its indicators and themes, ganyan, as an HR practitioner, parang, I was thinking, this is really a very powerful framework. From an HR practitioner's point of view, it integrates everything that we do in HR. We always get criticized for, ang HR, dami-daming ginagawa, wala namang patutunguhan. That's why I think it's very important that we have that framework. And that's the thing, siguro, that we need to do. Get organizations, get senior leaders to see the power of a framework. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think the framework serves as a guide when you're journeying. Like whenever we journey, we need some guides. I think this is where the framework comes into be handy. It's a benchmarking tool to see how we're progressing along the way. It serves many purposes because I think when you want to change or transform organizations, it's going to be a journey, definitely.
Right.
And you'll have to have milestones along the way. And you need a
Exactly.
framework to be able to guide you all through that because it may not always be very easy. Some periods might be very difficult for the organization. And this is where the framework becomes very, very useful.
So openness, people have to be more open, siguro, to learning from others. Like, I'm sure, the companies that we have in the IIP community are learning from each other also.
That's right.
Diba?
That's
So,
right.
for those who don't have a framework, it would probably help,
That's right.
for them to be more open to, to good practices outside of their own organization. Because like I was saying kanina, akala ko we had the best programs already when I was working with a large organization. But hindi. I continue to learn every time, I assess companies. Maybe not as big as the ones that I've worked with, but there's a lot of learning there, but you have to be open.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, talking about challenge for IIP Philippines, for me, the challenge that we face, continue to face, and we're continuing to resolve it is the image that we're just assessors. No? You mentioned that earlier. No? But I think one thing that the audience needs to understand about us is before we even became assessors, we were already trainers, consultants, mentors, and now recently coaches. So we really, as a team, provide this wide array of skill sets
Right.
that enable us to be able to help organizations transform. But because we give awards or accreditations, the assessing part, the assessor's role is the one that's very prominent. So we want, and I think talking about challenge, I think we need to make organizations understand that we are not just assessors. No. Assessor is part of it. Assessing is part of
Yeah.
it, definitely.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing we do to be able to really help organizations transform.
Yeah.
So that to me is the challenge that we continue to still try to overcome
Right.
by educating the community about what
Yeah.
we can do for them. Talking about frustrations, Pinky, do you have any frustrations in 2024?
Marami. I mean, on the business side, siguro it's ano, no? Yung parang, you really want to be able to help, no? Using our tagline, no? Make work better for organizations, no? But the lack of, ano siguro parang, parang many of them continue to be insular. You know what I mean? Yung parang, hindi, we're doing things right here. We don't need you. Parang ganon, no? Or we don't need, all these things that you want to offer. Parang, it's very frustrating because all you really want to do is help, no? Because us who have gone through that journey, we know what value it brings, no? So that makes me very frustrated. Even with friends who are heads of HR of, fairly large organizations, you parang, can you try to be more open to what's going on around you? You can learn from the smaller companies, you don't own it all. Malay mo, you can pick up a few practices from others, no? So, that's very frustrating. And I wish, people would be more open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine is kind of similar to yours. So it's the frustration that I get is the mindset that people have when they just pay lip service to people, because it's a nice thing to say, isn't it? People are our greatest asset, and yet that's not where their heart really belongs. No, so I think, and this is where all the shortcuts are done. One of my favorite ways of describing it is organizations who build their business at the expense of culture.
Uh-oh.
They destroy culture in the process of building their business. It's a very short-term oriented, strategy, and I don't see why some organizations can see it that way. That the only sustainable thing because culture to me is execution ability. It's the ability of the organization to execute. So if you don't take care of that, so there's not going to be any future to really talk about. It's like the story of we got this from Stephen Covey before, the goose that lays the golden eggs. If the farmer gets greedy, why because the goose only lays one golden egg each day. I want all the golden eggs, so I better cut the goose into half so that I can get all the golden eggs, only to find out you have a dead goose and there are no more golden eggs. That is what precisely, by analogy, what some business leaders are doing if they're trying to improve business at the expense of culture.
Correct.
Jerry, when you ask about frustrations, well, yeah, I guess we've got to look at the negatives as well as the positives, and life's a balance, isn't it? I suppose what comes to mind, rather than frustration, is maybe sometimes disappointment. Occasionally, and fortunately not very often, you see an organization that's done some really wonderful things, and it's built up its people strategy, its people practices over the years to have really excellent practice. You can see the benefit it's having to the organization as a whole. It's not just to the people, it's benefiting people and the performance of the organization. And then there's a change of leadership, and the baby is swept out with the bathwater, I think, when maybe it's okay, we're not going to do that anymore. I don't know whether it's wasn't invented by us, so we're going to change it, or we don't want to be bothered with those practices that we don't necessarily maybe understand why we've got them. I don't know, but that's a disappointment when that happens, because it seems it's Siam. It's such a shame that good practices have been developed, innovated, improved, and then no longer used or no longer adopted. So that's very sad. I think, just picking up on Pinky's point, when you have leaders who really understand the link between good people policies, good people practices, positive people practices, and the benefit of the organization, like organizations, like Watson's, who understand how important well-being is, or PJ Lewis, all of the organizations that we've talked about, but also that actually learn from each other. Pinky was talking about, you don't just necessarily have to learn from another large organization if you are one, or even think that you've got all the answers, because the answers are out there everywhere. And if an organization can actually even, have that philosophy of we are going to learn from outside in whatever way, whether it's, in your own operational kind of work, like NAMRIA, for example, learning from others in mapping. Many of our organizations do this. They learn from overseas, they learn from the Philippines, they learn from outside their organization. I think, that is one of the indications to me of a really good organization. And and particularly if I want to mention First Balfour in doing that, bringing in people who have new ideas, bringing in completely new technology that isn't being used in the Philippines to benefit the organization and to benefit the people who work in it. So, yeah, I guess I've talked about both frustrations and things that are exciting there as well. But learning from, being open to learning is definitely something that's an indication of a good organization that will prosper in the future.
Talking about blind spots, that's a nice term to use. What do you see are blind spots of leaders? Why can't they not see? Why can't they not see the light? What do you think is blocking leaders from seeing the true value of people in businesses?
I was thinking, what do leaders need to learn some more? No? Siguro, emotional intelligence.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe, that's probably lacking. Maybe, they don't see it all. The need to communicate better, more transparently. Because if you don't talk to people, you don't know what their sentiments are, you don't know where they are. You cannot lead well if you don't see the whole picture, diba? If they're thinking only of I know all the solutions, I have all the knowledge, then it doesn't help. It doesn't help. So I think that's a major blind spot for leaders. Yeah.
I think talking about blind spots, this is where we get back to the discussion about the manager and the leader. If you're just a manager, you have a lot of blind spots. And the manager is supposed to be the all-knowing. I make all the decisions. I know all the answers to questions and things like that, and which is not basically true.
I'm the boss.
I'm the boss because I'm the boss, You have to follow me. I think that has limitations, especially in a very uncertain world. So I think talking about blind spots, and then you couple that with a reward system that is very short-term oriented. I want results in the next, by the quarter, for instance. So you have a lot of situation where people, managers behave in a certain way. They build the business at the expense of culture or people. So I think that's where all the forces are coming in to be able to see why managers behave the way they do.
Yeah. Command and control.
Yeah, command and control.
Itong gawin mo, do this, do that.
Precisely.
Follow me. Diba?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Even the classic issue we had with the return to the office thing was a tug,
Tug of war.
tug of war between employees and people. All of a sudden they want everyone to go back to the office, and of course people who employees who already experience the autonomy and the flexibility and things like that refuse. No? And if you're a good talent, you will look for jobs elsewhere. So this I think is a classic, use of power rather than collaboration to be able to get to some agreed solutions.
Yeah, right, right.
Okay, if we were to help other organizations, given on all our reflections in the last few minutes, Pinky, what sort of actionable insights can we offer? Let's say some organizations are willing, to be better at this.
I said this earlier, leadership transformation, that's very important. Because like I've been saying from the beginning, no, it starts from the top. So to me, that's something that should be done. No? Broaden siguro the perspective, mindsets of leaders, of managers, the leaders. Yun, I think that's something that
Yeah,
should be a
that's
key
right.
focus. No?
Talking about organization transformation, I think for me, we should look at transformation as a journey rather than an event or
I agree.
events
I
or
agree.
series of events. Meaning to say, it's a journey. It can be a long journey, but along the way, you can have milestones
Mm,
so that you can see how you're progressing
mm,
towards your
mm.
your ultimate end. So that to me might be another good framing of what transformation requires for
Yeah,
for
yeah,
organizations. That's
yeah,
the advice
yeah,
that I could give them.
yeah. True. I agree.
For me, there, I would say work on empowering people. Um, as we've mentioned earlier, developing leaders' coaching skills is one strategy for that, but look at a whole strategy for how do you get a culture of empowerment? How do we make all our leaders empowering in all sorts of ways? And I think also be willing to think about how the organization might be different and better in the future. And by that I mean the structure of the organization. We are very hierarchical. And is that the best way for us to organize work in the future as we go into 2025 and beyond, with the new generation of workers that we have who maybe don't want to take that step into a leadership role? How are we going to make our organizations work in the future with AI, with a changing workforce? And does it have to be hierarchical as it has been for centuries, or do we need to start to look at how we can do things differently? So that, I would say, empowering people, and maybe the two go together, and thinking about what is the best structure for the organization in the future would be things to be thinking about as leaders.
Wearing my coaching hat. What do leaders have to do? Maybe, like I probably was saying earlier, broaden their understanding of what the leadership role is. Go beyond, as Jerry has said, managing. It isn't just that, no. It's also learning to be, good coaches. Build that competency siguro, no? How can they be more effective coaches? And by coaching, I mean, empowering employees to, to be self-sufficient, like finding their own solutions, believing in their ideas, enabling them to carry out what that also encourages innovation, di ba? So siguro yon, the thing maybe that leaders have to learn is how to be effective coaches themselves, no?
Yeah,
And maybe also, and I've read this in many articles, no, building coachability, getting people to understand the value of coaching. What does coaching mean for them? What can it do for them? And be open to that.
if I may just build on that, I think to me coaching is about primarily self-awareness. One of the key takeaways from a coaching conversation is improved self-awareness on the part of the coachee. I think one of the challenges for leadership is to start with the self. I think leading self is critical, and this is where self-awareness before you even get to know other people and manage them and lead them. I think it should be inward first. No, one should be very good at being aware of one's thoughts, feelings. What do you bring to the world? What are you passionate about, and things like that. All this self-awareness thing is very critical. I'm aware of my biases. I'm
Yeah.
aware of when my ego, is taking over rather than what I need to do and things like that. This is very critical for leadership.
Yeah.
Before you can even lead others well,
Mm.
I think leading self
Mm.
becomes very, very critical.
Correct. Correct. Can't agree more.